Microsoft has embraced jQuery in a big way, even to the point of creating its own extensions to the core library as part of the standard jQuery contribution process. Some of Microsoft's top web and JavaScript developers are working with members of the core jQuery team in order to create extensions that replace parts of the Microsoft AJAX library to do things like make data more readily usable from client-side web pages and make it easier to implement globalization on a site. One group is even attempting to create a UI grid that will be full-featured enough to handle almost any kind of scenario. These really are pretty exciting times in Microsoft's corner of jQuery. What I'm going to do now is talk about the main Microsoft extensions and see how you might use them in a web page. At the time that jQuery 1.5 came out, all of these extensions were in various beta stages, although jQuery Global seems to be the furthest along in development. So make sure that you get the latest version before playing with them in test projects. Now, at this moment, jQuery templates and data link are available through the NuGet Library Package Manager, and I expect that Microsoft will make all of its extensions available through NuGet. In fact, you can update the jQuery library usually within about a week after a new release just by using NuGet and adding the update to an existing project. All right, so the first extension that I want to talk about is jQuery templates. Client-side templates were one of the major features that Microsoft added to its AJAX library before it ceased all development on it and switched over to jQuery. Shortly after they announced their support for jQuery in ASP.NET and Visual Studio, Microsoft made a proposal to add templates to jQuery, and after a lot of hard work by Microsoft and the jQuery community, templates are pretty close to reality. Templates let you easily generate and render HTML in the client by defining the HTML that the browser should generate for each item in a set of data. The template itself is a declarative definition of the structure of the generated HTML along with binding expressions, so that at runtime you can programmatically invoke the template with data as JavaScript objects to create content and markup for the page. You can generate the JavaScript objects dynamically on the client or retrieve them via AJAX from the server. So you have a lot of flexibility in where the data comes from that's bound to this template. The biggest benefit of using client-side templates is that you can easily structure content you add dynamically to a page without using string concatenation and the pain of writing code to make it all work. All you need to do is define the template using plain old HTML, insert simple binding expressions where the data from each data item should go, and then invoke the template at runtime. It really is a pretty slick way of updating a page on the client. It's certainly not like ASP.NET Web Forms, but on the client, it's pretty slick and it's pretty easy to do. At one point, it looked like the jQuery team was going to incorporate templates into the core library, which would be pretty big. But that didn't happen, at least as of jQuery 1.5 and some of the subsequent updates. And that was really a big disappointment to the Microsoft developers who built the plugin. But it still appears likely that templates will make their way into the library at some point, but no one really seems to know when that will happen, or even if it actually is going to. All right, so let's see how you can use templates within a web page. When you first encounter templates, it really can sound like a rather abstract concept, but hopefully an example will serve to make them clear. So here I have the templates.html page. This calls an ASP.NET web service in order to retrieve JSON data containing information about a few of the boroughs in Alaska. It's a similar kind of operation using the same web service as other examples that I've used in this course. The page here, though, uses templates to dynamically structure the data into the list items displayed on the page. So I have 4 buttons altogether. The first 3 buttons all display the same information, so I'll go ahead and execute that. And as you can see, it displays some information about various Alaska boroughs, and it retrieved the information from the server using an AJAX call. And then behind the scenes, it uses templates in order to bind that data and generate the HTML that's actually displayed within the page. All right, so I have various versions of this using templates in different ways. And then I also use a little bit different template in order to demonstrate some of the other features that you can embed within templates. Okay, so that's what the page does. So here's the source code for the page. I'll first of all go down to the body of the page so you can see the HTML. So you can see it's pretty simple. Have the header, have all of those buttons, and then I have a div element to receive the updated data. So nothing all that interesting here, and more importantly, nothing that indicates that this div element is going to be updated using templates, or in fact that it's going to be updated at all with anything. All right, go back up to the top of the page. As you can see, I have several script references here. I have one to the jQuery 1.5 library, and then I have one to the template add-in. So this is what implements or makes available this templating feature within the page. And then I also have a third script file, add commas. That's just a nice public domain JavaScript function that will add commas to make the borough population data look a little bit easier to read. All right, so now we get to the more interesting parts of the page. There are a few different ways to define a template in a page. And the easiest is to include it as the content of a script element on the page. And this script element implements that technique. So this defines a template for the borough data. As you can see, we have a type of text xQuery template, and it includes the HTML as the content of the template. So that's defining the template for each of the list items that displays information about the borough. Now, there are three binding expressions within this template. The first one is for the borough name. As you can see, the syntax for this is $, curly bracket, and then a closing curly bracket. And then the colon and space are static text. And then I have another binding expression here. And that reads the population information from the set of borough data. And then finally, I have one for the year that the borough was created. So those are the three fields within the borough object that I'm going to get back from the server. Now, the nice thing about this is that you can include additional JavaScript here. So this binding expression reads the value of the population field from the borough data, from each row of the borough data, and then runs it through this add commas function, which formats the number with commas that delineate the thousands within the number. And by the way, you may see a binding syntax that actually consists of 2 opening curly brackets and 2 closing curly brackets. I think Microsoft bounced back and forth between the two syntaxes, but it appears as though this $ curly bracket is the one that's going to win and be the final version. But double curly brackets will work as well. All right, so what this template does is it's going to generate a list item element for each row of data that it gets back from the server. So again, if I go back over to the page here, if I run the page again and look at this version, that template is going to define the list item, each one of these list items in the list. And as you can see, I'm getting back information about 5 boroughs from the web service. So it's going to generate 5 list items. All right, I'll talk about this template a little bit later. So here's the click event function for that first button. As you can see, I'm using an AJAX method in order to make a call to get all boroughs. It's going to return JSON data. And when I get a response, a successful response, I'm going to execute this anonymous function. It gets the response that is returned from the server, and it first adds just a little bit of explanatory text on the page. So it's going to use that div result, clear it out, and then append that header paragraph. And here's the interesting stuff as far as templates go. It's going to start by reading the D response, the response.d, in order to get the JSON data, the set of boroughs. And then it's going to use this template method, TMPL method, pass in that borough's data, and this is the statement that actually binds the data to the template and generates the HTML. Once it's generated that HTML, the code then appends it to that borough list, unordered list item. And that's defined right here. So that's all you need to do. A very simple template definition, retrieve some JSON data from the server, and then use this template method to bind it all together and generate the HTML. All right, so that's the code behind the first button. Here's the code behind the second button, which uses templates in a slightly different way. This results in the same content that updates the page, the same list of boroughs. But instead of using a template that's defined within a script element, it passes the template definition as a string to the template method. And you can see that right here. So this time I'm calling the TMPL method as a utility function of the jQuery function, passing in the template definition, and that uses the exact same definition as was described in the script element. And then I pass the data. And this takes care of binding this data to this template. It doesn't use that other template defined within the script element at all. And you get the same result. So this is a really convenient way to use a short, simple template that you'll use in only one place on a page. Templates can get very complex. You're not limited to single elements. You're not limited to any kind of small chunk of HTML. They can be as big and convoluted as you want. And so this technique of embedding it within the template method really only works for small snippets, small templates like this, that generally are going to generate only a single element. Yet another option is to create a named template. And that's what this next code does. So you create the name template, and then you can just reference that name template within your code that binds the data. This is a really convenient way to manage multiple templates that you'll use in a page. And the nice thing about it is that you can put the template definitions into a separate JS file or JavaScript file, and you can include them in whatever pages you need to use those templates. All right, so the first thing you need to do is create the name template. And you use this template method in order to do that, giving it a string name. And once again, this is defining the exact same template that we've been using to create that list item object. But now, once I've defined this, I can use this borough template anywhere within the page. This is the click event function behind the button Get Named. It does all the same things, it makes the AJAX call to retrieve the data. But now, instead of passing the template as a string, I just reference that existing named template. And then that's bound to the data, and I get the same effect, and the page is updated with the list of boroughs. All right, yet another variation is that you're not limited to including simple binding expressions in static HTML for a template. There's a variety of template tags that you can use to dynamically customize a template at runtime in various ways. For example, I have this other template defined in the header section up here. And what this does is it once again displays the borough information. It's creating individual list item objects. And it's using the binding expressions in order to get the name and the population and create it. But it's using this if expression in order to test to see whether or not the population is greater than 200,000. And if it is, it's going to output this static text. So this is a very simple example of modifying what the template does for each row of data based on the data itself or other conditions. You have a lot of flexibility in how you implement this. And there's various other template tags that you can use, such as else, which you can use with if for alternate conditions, and each to loop through objects. And that's very handy for displaying child objects. So maybe I had a list of cities within each borough. I could use the each operator in order to display the list of the borough cities as well as the borough information itself. All right, so that's the borough template mega. So I can come down here to the final button. And the only thing that's different here is that it's referencing that different template in order to bind the borough's data. And that results in, if I click on this last button, the municipality of Anchorage being listed as a megaborough. So a very simple example of how you can use operators within a template. So once the final version of jQuery templates is released, it's going to be much easier to create updated content for a page using JavaScript objects. The template definition and the required code is much simpler than performing string concatenation, and you can create some very complex templates for updated content that would be an absolute nightmare to write string concatenation code for. Templates are pretty cool, and they're very useful as a way of easily generating dynamic content in a page. But they're one way only. You can bind the data to the template for display, but there's no support to let the user update the data and automatically update the underlying JavaScript objects. That's where data linking comes in, which is implemented in the jQuery data link plugin that Microsoft developed. Data linking provides a way to link a property of one object to a property of another object. Once they're linked, updating the linked property on either object automatically updates the property on the other object. The most common use for data linking is to link the properties of a JavaScript object to form fields on a page. This data linking behavior is more commonly called binding, but since there's already a jQuery bind method, the team decided to call it data linking instead. The jQuery bind method binds events to objects, not to data. So don't get confused between those two. If the names of the properties of the two objects are the same, such as if a form's input elements have name attributes with values that are the same as the object you want to link to, data linking can automatically set up all of the links for you. Or you can specify a mapping between the two objects' properties, whatever works best for you. The plugin also supports converters, letting you define a function that automatically performs conversion or formatting when you need to modify the property value as it's updated on the other object. There's a lot of flexibility that's built into the data link plugin. The plugin consists of two primary methods, link and unlink. As their names suggest, the link method creates a link between object properties, and unlink breaks the link. You won't often have to use unlink because the plugin cleans up a link when either its target or source object is a DOM element that is going out of memory, such as when its parent object is cleared. If you've done a lot of data binding with ASP.NET and other parts of the .NET framework, this might all sound pretty familiar. And it kind of works the same to a limit. But there's one huge difference, at least in the current development version of the data link plugin. The difference is that the linking isn't activated automatically once you call the link method when binding an object to a form or input elements. Instead, it's activated by the DOM change event, and that event is triggered when the input control loses the focus and its contents have been changed since it last had the focus. Now, most of the time, this won't be a huge issue, but you will need to make allowances for this behavior in how you use and code data links. Now, how it's all going to work in the final release is anybody's guess at this point, though it will take some time for Microsoft Proposal to gain acceptance of the jQuery community and get approval. And until then, the plugin is definitely a moving target. So let's see how it works. In order to explore data linking, I'll use the context.html sample page, which I adapted from a reference sample used by the data link team to demonstrate how data linking works at any given point. When you first load the page, it displays the contact information for a couple of people. It's a pretty simple application for maintaining a set of contacts, letting you add new contacts. I'll go ahead and add myself. And I can add a new phone number here. Home. Okay. And so you can see that it takes care of collecting basic information, does some simple sort of formatting and so forth. It also has a sort of interesting field here. I'm going to go with the default value here and go back to my 20s. But what it does is it takes the age of the person and displays a bar that indicates the proportional age of that person. So Dave Reed is 32, so that's not all that wide. John Doe is 87, so it's a wider bar. And I'm using the default of 20, and so that's even narrower. And you can update the age there. If I want to be a little bit more realistic, I'll say 40. And you can see that the age bar increases in size based on the value there. All right, you can sort by last name. And you can also save contacts. This doesn't actually save the contacts, but what it does instead is it displays the JSON data that is behind the application. And it has support for removing different phone numbers and so forth. Now, by the way, this is one sample for which it's better to use Firefox, Chrome, or Safari than Internet Explorer. I didn't try it with Opera, nor with older versions of any of the browsers. But IE8 displays all of the JSON data here on a single line on the web page, which makes it hard to read and understand. It's nice to be able to display that information in a readable form so that you can monitor it during development. All right, so let's look at the code. The page uses a fairly complex jQuery template, here defined within this contact template script element. So as you can see, this is pretty much the complete HTML, well, is the complete HTML for each contact record. So it defines the header row here, and then it uses that each operator in order to display each of the contacts within this collection. So here's the template for each of the contacts. And then it also defines a template for each of the phones. So you can see that this is the template for each contact. And it includes a child template for each of the phone numbers for each of the contacts. So you can start to see just how sophisticated you can get with jQuery templates. Just imagine trying to code all of this in JavaScript, concatenating elements together. It'd be an absolute nightmare. All right, so that's the page. If I come down here, it's just very simple HTML, has a few buttons as well as the results element. So most of what's interesting about this page is within this contacts.js JavaScript file. So I reference this on the page. If I come back over here to the top, I include that file within the page. There's a lot here, and it's really worth taking some time to explore, but I just want to point out a few things about the data linking features. The code file itself starts out by creating the contacts object and initializing it with 2 contacts, each with 2 phone numbers. This is just a regular old JavaScript object. Then, as you add, remove, and change contact information, the page stores the data in this object, which it links to the input elements on the page. Then starting down here at about row 54, right there, here is where it binds that contact's information to that contact template in the page using that jQuery templates method, TMPL. And the result is bound to this contacts table. And then the code goes through and creates a row for each contact, as well as nested tables for the phone numbers. So it's using the jQuery each method in order to loop through each of the contact rows. And here's where it uses the link method in order to bind all of the input elements within the row to the contact properties with the same name. So the nice thing about this is that because the code uses the same name for the elements that you're binding to as the name of the elements or the name of the fields within the data, you don't have to explicitly do any kind of mapping between the fields. It just automatically matches up the properties in one object with the properties in the other object that have the same name. And then this line of code binds the age information to that age bar, and it uses this convert back function in order to create or to set the width of that age bar. So it's just it's using the value of the age property, the person's age, to set the width in pixels. So kind of a slick little technique there. And then it also uses the trigger method in order to trigger the change field event to the value of the contact's age, which is what causes the link to be created for that field. So that's where it's a little bit funky, a little bit different from binding within ASP.NET Web Forms, because you sometimes have to explicitly trigger an event in order to get the binding to occur. Okay, then there's a lot more code that sets up the click event function for the contact remove and contact reset events, or for those links. And the contact reset link just retrieves the original values from the first and last names and restores them if there's been any kind of changes. And that code is right here. So as you can see, the code automatically keeps track of original values for the data object. Then here's the code that takes care of linking the contact's phone type and number to the input elements. And then other code also sets up the click event functions for the phone remove and the new phone links. Now, this code sets up a mapping of the phone number field so they can use a converter in order to format the phone number. And that's called phone. The code that defines that converter starts back up here at about line 15. Yeah. It's extending jQuery in order to define this phone converter that takes care of parsing out the number and prettifying it, adding parentheses around the area code and adding spaces and a dash and so forth. So that's all you need to do in order to define a converter that changes the data or the format of the data before it's displayed on the page. All right, so as you can see, it takes a little bit of work to set up and use data linking in a page, but it's far simpler than it would be in plain JavaScript code, a recurring theme when you talk about jQuery and extension. Each iteration of the plugin as it progresses towards final release really makes things a little bit easier. So there's a pretty good chance that you'll need to write even less code in the final release version, whenever that ends up seeing the light of day. The jQuery Global plugin is easily the furthest along of all of Microsoft's extensions to jQuery. Global provides a number of features that let you use any of about 350 cultural conventions to format and parse numbers, currencies, calendars, and dates and times. It comes with more than 1,400 support files that contain all of the conventions that you need. You don't have to do any kind of work in order to discover the convention used by a particular culture. You can include all of the cultures in your website, or just those cultures that you explicitly support. The plugin itself includes a variety of methods to work with various cultures, and the jQuery UI extension is going to be using Global in the future to provide globalization support for those tools. So let's take a look at how you can take advantage of these global extensions. The global.html page has a paragraph of text with some numbers embedded within it and a date. When the page first loads, as you can see here, the numbers and the date appear for users in the United States. The page includes this drop-down list, which includes all of the cultures that are supported by the jQuery globalization plugin. When you select a different culture, I'll select Arabic, it changes the formatting of the numbers and the date on the page in order to match that culture. So you can select various other cultures and see how that data would be represented. There's Korean. Let's look at Persian and Tamil. All right, now it's important to understand that the changes that the page is making to the text are data format changes only. There aren't any kind of currency conversions going on here. So I'm sure in Tamil, this would actually be an entirely different number in the local currency. But if I go back to English, you can see that the United States paid Russia $7.2 million for Alaska. But there's no conversions going on here. In order to convert the currencies to the equivalent value in another currency, the page would have to require access to some kind of currency exchange web service or other resource for real-time exchange values. And I just didn't do that within this page. Okay, we're focused on the formatting of the data. All right, so let's go over and take a look at the code behind the page. So first of all, here's the code for the body of the page, the HTML. So here's the select element that is going to receive the list of cultures. And then I have a paragraph element within a div tag with all of these embedded figures. Notice that in order to update the values within the text, all of the values, the initial values, are embedded within a span element. So that makes it easy to reference those values within code and update the values. And then each of the span elements has a data dash attribute. Here's data dash date and data dash price and data dash number are the three different versions of that. Those are new HTML5 custom attribute types for attaching data to elements in a page. So this page is using those attributes to save the number and date values in the EN-US culture, English as practiced within the United States, because that's the default culture on the machine where this code is running. This way, the page always has the original base value used to change to another culture. All right, go back up to the top of the page. And you can see that the page includes two references to JavaScript files related to globalization. The first one is the main file, global.js. That's the global plugin itself, which implements all of the extensions within the jQuery.global namespace. Actually defines a new namespace. The second reference here is to jQuery.globe.all.js. This is included with the plugin in the globe info folder, and you can rename that or use that folder directly within your application. This file contains the culture information for all 350 or so cultures defined in the plugin. This makes it really easy to include all of the culture information instead of listing 350 separate .js files. Now, it's relatively rare that you're going to want to include all 350 cultures. So more often, you'll just want to include limited culture information for the users who visit your site. So in that case, rather than including a reference to the jQuery.globe.all file, you can include a reference to a limited number of culture files. And that's what this code down here does. In this case, I'm only interested in the local culture, which it uses by default, as well as French as practiced in France, and Japanese. In this case, if this is the only cultures, if these are the only two other cultures that I'm going to support on this web page, then I can comment out this line of code and include those two lines only. So I'll save that, go back over to my page and reload it. So I once again get the default appearance. And notice that because the page uses methods that are supported within the global plugin, it automatically reaches out, sees that there are only 3 cultures that are supported, because I only included those 2 additional cultures in addition to the local culture. So you can start to see how there are a lot of really nice features within this plugin to support this kind of programming. All right, so if I go over here into Solution Explorer and look in the scripts folder, you can see that I have that global file, that's the plugin itself, and I've included this entire globe info folder as a subfolder of scripts. And as you can see, make this a little bit wider. Oops. Mouse control today is not good. There we go. And as you can see, you have listed all of the 1,400 support files. And again, the nice thing is that you don't have to collect all of that culture information. Now, once again, I've included all of those files, but if I'm really only going to support 2 or 3 or 4 or a limited number of cultures, I can whittle this down and delete the files that I'm not actually going to use. It's up to you how you handle that. All of those files have both debugging and minified versions, which is part of the reason why there's so many, those 1,400. You'll find that the debugging version of the jQuery.globe.all file, this one right here, is more than a megabyte in size. And it's still about 368K when it's minimized, but not compressed. So it'll be a little bit smaller if you compress it. Most of the individual culture files weigh in at anywhere from about 1 to 25K. So this is where you should include only the culture files on a page that you're actually going to use, because this is going to be a pretty big download. All right, so the JavaScript code on the page has to do two things. It has to populate the drop-down list with a list of cultures, and then change the numbers and date when the user changes the culture selection. So here's the code that takes care of populating that select element. It starts by getting a reference to that select culture object. And it stores it in this select variable, because it's going to be used multiple times here. You don't absolutely need to do that, but this makes the code a little bit more efficient because it only needs to grab that reference a single time. And then it clears the list in case there's anything in it. And then it uses the jQuery each method in order to loop through all of the cultures loaded on the page. And it does that using the jQuery function .global.cultures method. And that's part of the global plugin. The nice thing about this is that this is going to return a collection of the cultures that are actually included on the page. So as I have the page configured now, it's going to loop through the English culture as well as the additional cultures here. If I still had this file included within the page instead of individual cultures, then it's going to loop through all roughly 350 of those cultures. So for each culture, it creates a new option element that has information with the English name of the culture and then the internal name as the value. So it's very slick that it includes this cultures method, which makes it really easy to get access to all of the cultures that are included within the page. All right, then the rest of the code on the page defines what happens when the user changes the selection in the list of cultures. It defines an anonymous function to respond to the JavaScript onChange event. And it uses the change method, jQuery function, in order to define that event. The first thing the code does is it uses the global plugin's prefer culture method to set the current culture to the user's selection. This acts as a kind of global setting within the plugin to guide how the data is converted and parsed and formatted. This is kind of an interesting method in that it attempts to find the best match to the user's preferred culture of the cultures that you've included in the page. Now, if I include all cultures in the page, it should be an exact match. But in the current case, because I only include those couple additional cultures, it's going to try and find the best match. And it's going to do that even if you haven't included the exact selection within the page. But in this page, it's always going to be an exact match because I'm only allowing the user to select cultures that are included on the page. All right, the rest of the code in the list's onChange event function is to parse the data in the data-attributes and then format it according to the selected culture. It does this 3 times, using the same basic pattern for the 3 types of data: date, price, and number. I have multiple price objects, and so this version here is going to take care of updating the data for all of the span elements that have the data price attribute. All right, so the first thing it does is it gets the attribute value. In this case, the data-date. Okay, those are those HTML5 style attribute values. And then it retrieves that value. So the date string object here is going to contain the starting, the en-us format of the data. And then it's going to use the parseDate method in order to take the data from that format in the en-us and then convert it into a raw date value. Finally, it uses the globalization plugin's format method in order to format the date value in a specific format according to the culture that is currently set here. So if I select Arabic from the list, it's going to read the value in the English US format, save it to datestring, parse it into essentially a generic date value, and then format the date according to the Arabic culture. And then it does the same basic thing for the price fields. In this case, there are several of them. And then does the same thing for the date and number. And once again, you can see that there's no conversion going on here. Also, you can see that the format method accepts a variety of formatting strings. So here it's going to format it as a date, here as a currency, and here as a number with 0 decimal places.